Hey everyone, tonight we're going back in time to the Middle Ages, a time when people saw things so strange that if you or I saw them now, we'd both call the news, the priest, and maybe an ex to apologize right away. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And please leave a comment to let me know where you are and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who is joining us from all over the world. Now, turn down the lights and maybe turn on a fan to make a soft noise in the background. And let's take it easy as we start our journey tonight. People who lived in villages in the Middle Ages woke up every day expecting the same old problems: a broken cartwheel, a bad batch of ale, or Gerald the town gossip spreading rumors again. When they walked into the barn, they were surprised to find that the cow had given birth to something so strange that even God would have said, "Okay, who messed with the settings?" Cows in the Middle Ages had calves that looked like they had been made by a group of drunk goblins. You'd see the classics, like a two-headed calf that looked like it was judging the whole village at once, or the calf with no face, just smooth, creepy skin, like a jump scare from a medieval horror movie. Sometimes the mouth was on top of the head, as if the universe had hit shuffle on the facial features. And because people in the Middle Ages didn't know, they jumped to the most logical conclusion right away, whether it was about genetics, mutations, or the fact that this cow had a bad night. The sky was mad. Angry beyond belief, everyone started to make predictions right away. This is a sign, a warning. It was definitely Margaret's fault. Yesterday, she said hello to a crow. The monks got there in record time, ready to record the horrible event as if it were an exclusive interview. They would draw the poor thing with all the seriousness of Renaissance artists and write on it something dramatic like, "Year of our Lord, a beast with two heads was born, foretelling chaos." At the same time, the calf was just there, confused and probably hungry. The villagers, on the other hand, talked about what the creature meant. Half of the people in the village said it was a sign from God. The other half said it was a warning from the devil. Some people said, maybe it's just a strange cow. They were ignored right away. People had very different ideas about what to do with the creature. Some thought that these animals brought good luck. They kept them then. Some people thought they brought bad luck, so they buried them. Some people, with a level of confidence that can only be called medieval audacity, said to eat it. They would say, "Meat is meat," while everyone else quietly made plans to send them away. And don't forget about the Lord. He always showed up in the end because he wanted to see the strange animal for himself, not out of pity, but because lords liked to collect strange things. He wanted the calf to look like a mythological creature if it was born that way. His backyard right away. For people who lived in the Middle Ages, strange animal births were more than just biological accidents. They were like the medieval version of trending news, with events, drama, and entertainment. The village didn't just watch when a cow gave birth to something that looked like it came from hell. They freaked out, prayed, came up with theories, fought, blamed Margaret, and added it to the long list of things that show life is out to get us. Think about what life was like before electricity, neon lights, and the ability to Google, "Is blue fire normal?" and calm down by learning about the science behind it. Now, picture yourself going outside during a storm and seeing the church steeple glowing blue like it's about to cast a spell on everyone in the village. Welcome to the medieval version of St. Elmo's fire. Strong electric fields and storms cause St. Elmo's fire, which is just plasma. But this wasn't plasma to people in the Middle Ages. This was a cosmic announcement, a divine mood swing, and a supernatural, "Guess what? You won't be able to sleep tonight." When the blue flames showed up on the ship's masts, sailors acted like they were being visited by glowing angels. Half of the crew got down on their knees. The other half cried, and the captain acted like he knew what was going on, even though he didn't. Peasants came up with creative ways to deal with things on land. The lights on the church steeple come on. The demons are here. The roof of the barn shines blue. Witches, witches for sure. Your hair starts to glow and crackle. That's it. I'm dead. Some brave people reached out to touch it because people in the Middle Ages were able to be afraid of everything and still poke glowing things with sticks. People who touched it were usually blasted back by the static, and the village then called them spiritually charged or slightly cursed. And priests loved St. Elmo's fire, not because they understood it, but because it gave them great material for their sermons. They would stand in front of the church and say things like, "This is a sign from heaven," while secretly hoping that the blue flames wouldn't happen again while they were working. At the same time, travelers brought back new ideas every week. It's angels, it's evil spirits, it's spirits from the sea getting on ships. It means that someone in the village made God angry. Everyone quickly blamed Gerald, who always upset someone. And of course, the upper class used the event for dramatic effect. If St. Elmo's fire appeared on the castle turret, they would say that it was proof from God that their rule was blessed. The peasants quietly disagreed while shivering in the fields. The truth, the fire at St. Elmo's was not dangerous. It was just electricity showing off in bad weather. But people in the Middle Ages always didn't know that. They only knew that the world suddenly turned blue, like it had been dipped in magic. And if you lived in a time when there were no science books, no weather apps, and a strong belief that everything had a meaning, it wasn't just weird that the steeple glowed. It was a message from space, even if the message was just, "Storm's bad. Go inside." If you lived in Europe during the Middle Ages and suddenly wanted to dance, congratulations. People thought that was a medical emergency. During the dancing plague, whole towns would suddenly break out in non-stop dancing that they couldn't control. Not graceful waltzing or happy folk dancing. My legs have betrayed me, and I can't stop dancing. The most well-known outbreak happened in Strasbourg in the 16th century when a woman walked into the street and started dancing for no reason. People thought she would stop soon. No, she didn't. Instead, other villagers joined in, showing that peer pressure is stronger than common sense. In less than a week, dozens were dancing. hundreds in a month. It was like a flash mob in the Middle Ages, but no one planned it, liked it, or wanted it to end. Scientists today say that mass hysteria is to blame. Doctors in the Middle Ages thought hot blood was the cause of illness. If you didn't know what was wrong, the right answer was always hot blood, cold blood, or the devil. Priests said it was cursed and suggested that the dancers pray, fast, or, if that didn't work, play music to get them to dance out the demon. Yes, they did hire musicians. Picture yourself having to dance for hours while a guy with a drum tries to help you. At the same time, the dancers were tired, scared, and confused. Some begged someone to keep them still. Some people fell down, but their legs told them it wasn't time to rest, so they jumped back up. They danced through pain, hunger, and thirst, blisters, and, worst of all, public shame, which was the worst problem in the Middle Ages. The town officials finally got involved, not because they cared, but because people dancing themselves into medical bankruptcy is bad for taxes. What did they do? Make a stage, put the dancers on it, include musicians who are professionals. If you think there's no way they thought this would help, you're right. But the logic of the Middle Ages doesn't have to make sense. It just needs to sound sure of itself. Of course, not everyone responded with worry. Some villagers thought it was fun because they were so bored. What's going on today? Oh, just 40 people dancing when they don't want to. That's nice. Better than seeing goats again. In the end, the plague went away on its own, leaving behind traumatized legs and confused people. Was it stress from the mind, bad food, or peer pressure? Historians are still arguing about it, but people in the Middle Ages all agreed on one thing. It was the worst dance marathon in history, and no one even won a reward. If you've ever seen a big group of birds and thought, oh, wow, that's a lot, then medieval people would like to talk to you because they didn't see a flock. It wasn't even a group. It was a huge army in the sky that made day turn into night. Bird migrations in medieval Europe were so big that modern civilization can barely remember them. A huge feathered cloud would form in the sky when millions of birds, starlings, cranes, geese, and other birds flew up at once. The sky. This wasn't nature to people who lived in the Middle Ages. This was a sign, a message, a threat from the heavens, and the end of the world with feathers. Picture yourself as a peasant in the Middle Ages, picking turnips and not bothering anyone. When the sun suddenly goes away, it's not behind clouds, it's behind wings. The sky gets dark, the air fills with screeching, and it looks like every bird in Europe is flying in a coordinated attack. Of course, the villagers did the only thing that made sense. They panicked right away. Some people fell to their knees, sure that God was sending a message, and it was a very loud one. People thought this was the end of the world because people in the Middle Ages said it was the end of the world at least twice a week. A few hopeful people said, maybe it's a sign of good luck. But most people were worried that birds were going to start taking kids. And of course, the local priest had to say something, even though he didn't know much more than what he said. He would stand in front of the church and say something bold. For example, The birds are forming a heavenly army. At the same time, a single goose would land behind him and honk loudly, showing that at least one creature was clearly sent by Satan. The noise alone was enough to scare anyone. The sound of thousands of wings flapping together was like a medieval drumline mixed with windstorms and judgment. People put their hands over their ears and prayed. Animals were scared. Chickens ran in circles, which is what chickens do, but still. Horses tried to get away. Even the cats, who are usually not bothered by the idea of chaos, looked worried. And then there was the poop. This isn't in medieval records, but nature sure did. When millions of birds fly over, they drop millions of blessings, fields, roofs, wagons, and villages that aren't lucky. Everything was ruined. One unlucky guy could go outside for 2 minutes and come back looking like he'd lost a fight with oatmeal. But life went on once the sky cleared and the sun came out. The villagers sighed with relief. Priests acted like they were, got it right, and the birds kept moving, not caring at all about the existential crisis they were causing. People in the Middle Ages thought these armies in the sky were scary signs. It was just another Monday for the birds. If you were a peasant in the Middle Ages and wanted a quiet afternoon to churn butter or think about why everything hurt, the worst thing that could happen was seeing a Viking longship on the horizon. That didn't just mean Vikings, though. It stood for Viking. Berserkers, like a tornado with fur pants on, but with a human body. A berserker was not like most warriors. Oh no, these were the Nordic rage machines who fought in a trance so strong that even their fellow Vikings probably thought he needed therapy. Berserkers were known for going into battle without armor, without fear, and often without shirts. In Scandinavian weather, nothing says, "I'm ready to kill you," like willingly freezing your nipples off. Seeing a berserker in action was like seeing a myth come to life for medieval peasants. It was like seeing a myth come to life. A myth that is very loud and sweaty. These warriors would howl, shake, bite their shields, and foam at the mouth like a wolf that just drank coffee. Their eyes got bigger, their veins popped, and they ran into battle as fast as they could, sometimes faster than physics should let them. Picture yourself as a simple turnip farmer and seeing a huge blond man coming at you, screaming like a kettle that has been left on the fire too long. Strategy wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind. If you thought, "I am about to become a footnote in a monk's diary," you would be right. Now, to explain berserkers, modern historians like to use terms like psychological warfare, battle trance, and maybe hallucinogenic mushrooms. People in the Middle Ages had a simpler answer. This guy is possessed by something big, angry, and definitely not house-trained. Some people thought that berserkers turned into bears or wolves during fights. Some people thought that weapons couldn't hurt them, which was not true, but scary. A lot of people said their screams were loud enough to make cows faint. And to be honest, given how cows acted in the Middle Ages, that part might have been true. And then there was the biting of the shield. Berserkers would bite their shields like they were trying out for a medieval toothpaste commercial. People who lived in the area didn't think, "Oh, this is a way to scare people." They thought he was eating wood. He'll eat us next. Berserkers were even careful around other Vikings. These were the people you worked with. Didn't look them in the eye, the guys who were invited to the raid, but not the after party, because no one wanted to see them try to drink calmly. Berserkers were more than just strange to people in the Middle Ages. They were nightmares that came true. Nightmares that are shirtless, roaring, and full of adrenaline, and you can bet that every villager who saw one running toward them thought the same thing. That's all. I'm going inland. Red rain falling from the sky was not something that people in the Middle Ages needed in their already stressful lives. It was red rain falling from the sky. It was bad enough that it rained all the time. It ruined crops, flooded roads, and made every field muddy up to your ankles that smelled like animals that were sorry they had done something. But when the rain suddenly turned red, the villagers all said, "Ah, yes, the end of the world, finally." Here's what science says about it. Dust storms in the desert can send iron-rich particles so high into the air that when they mix with water, the water turns red. But people in the Middle Ages didn't know anything about meteorology. They had a simpler view of the world. If something strange happened, it was either God sending a message, the devil sending a note, or Margaret, the strange neighbor, playing with magic that was against the rules again. When blood rain first hit a village, people screamed in horror, and then screamed even more in horror. People ran through the streets, yelling about signs, omens, plagues, and in one case, the sky is bleeding. The sky is bleeding, which is honestly if you've never heard of iron dust, this is a perfectly reasonable way to look at it. People said that crops that were covered in red drops were cursed. The laundry that was hanging outside was quickly burned. People thought that animals with spots had been touched by demons. In the middle of all the chaos, a monk was always there with a quill, writing things like, "The heavens wept blood this day." This did not help anyone calm down at all. Priests hurried to set up emergency prayer meetings. The whole congregation stood outside in the very rain they were afraid of, begging the heavens for mercy while getting soaked in scary red drops. People said they could smell iron, which they could, but they thought it was the smell of God being disappointed. Meanwhile, smart villagers tried to collect the rain to look at it, hoping it really was blood. It wasn't, but people in the Middle Ages thought, it looks like blood and acts like rain, so it must be magical. If anyone suggested a natural, they were told to sit quietly right away because no one wanted to think clearly during a crisis. Animals, of course, didn't care. The grass was red and splattered, and the sheep grazed peacefully in the fields. Horses drank from red puddles without a care in the world. The chickens looked up at the sky like they were saying, "We've seen worse." The storm finally passed, the sky stopped bleeding, and the villagers went back to their normal lives, which for people in the Middle Ages still meant plagues, taxes, bread that wasn't very good, and Viking raids every now and then. There was no end to the world after blood rain. It just seemed that way, which was enough to scare people in the Middle Ages for a whole generation. If you think modern UFO sightings are crazy, wait until you hear what monks wrote down in the Middle Ages. These guys weren't scrolling through TikTok at 2 in the morning. They were sober, single, overworked, and very bored. They didn't just shrug and say, weather, when they saw something strange in the sky. They picked up a quill and acted like it was time to write down the end of everything. Medieval chronicles tell of wheels of fire, shields of fire, ships that glow, and globes that float through the sky. Everything except the phrase, I swear I'm not making this up, which is understood. Imagine a monastery at dusk, with the monks quietly chanting, a peaceful atmosphere. Then Brother Thomas bursts in, yelling, the sky is on fire and also spinning. The monks. People run outside, look up at the strange thing, which is probably a meteor, halo, or atmospheric optical illusion, and quickly decide that God is either testing them, warning them, or showing off. A monk might calmly say, maybe it's a natural light in the clouds. But right away, everyone ignores him because monks in the Middle Ages didn't spend their lives copying manuscripts by hand just to hear boring explanations. These reports were not vague either. Some monks draw the things in a way that is surprising. Detail. There will be pictures of round flaming shapes, swirling discs, bright arcs, and even things that look like glowing pizza crusts moving across the sky. Historians today would never get over it if one of them had drawn a classic flying saucer. People reacted in different ways. Some monks dropped to their knees, sure that the end of the world was coming, and thought about all the times they had stolen extra bread from the kitchen. Others grabbed pens and paper, eager for the chance to write down something other than the 5th page of Brother Matthew begat Brother Peter, who begat Brother Simon. And a few, the brave ones, talked about the meaning of the Bible, suggesting everything from angels fighting to God lighting up the sky for dramatic effect. On the other hand, the peasants who saw the same things gave simpler explanations. It's a sign. It's the end. Gerald is to blame again, and to be honest, medieval peasants blamed Gerald for everything. Scientists today, of course, blame meteors, auroras, ice crystals, and reflections in the air, which monks had never heard of. But the UFO diaries of the monks are still very funny, very honest, and very confusing. Were they from another planet? Were they weather events? Were they just men from the Middle Ages who needed something to do? It's hard to say, but one thing is for sure. When something lit up, spun, or flew through the sky in the Middle Ages, the monks didn't just see it, they wrote about it. If you ever get lost in a, first of all, congratulations on being in a medieval forest at night. You are already doomed, but you might see something in the distance that is glowing faintly. Something soft, creepy, greenish, like a dead soul stuck inside a log. People today would say, oh, cool, bioluminescent fungus. But people in the Middle Ages would say, no, that's a spirit. We're leaving. This glowing wood, which we now call foxfire, is caused by fungi that make light through a chemical reaction. But people in the Middle Ages clearly didn't know this. There were two possible reasons for what happened. Ghosts, and ghosts that are even angrier. Picture this. You're out in the woods at night getting firewood, which is already a bad idea. And all of a sudden, you see a stump glowing green, as if it wants you to figure out a riddle. You drop everything, scream, and run home so fast that you come up with cardio centuries before it was invented. The stories spread like wildfire, which is funny because they spread faster than medieval fire safety allowed. The peasants whispered. Some people said the glowing logs were enchanted by fairies, which sounds cute until you remember that medieval fairies were basically little demons with hobbies. Things got worse when church leaders got involved. Priests told villagers not to go near the glowing wood because it might corrupt their souls. This is funny because the most dangerous thing was falling over a root and hitting their heads. Some people said that foxfire showed where bad spirits met. Some people thought it was where souls that had drowned came together at night. Some people even said that the glow meant that the forest was alive and watching. To be fair, wolves, bears, and other animals in medieval forests were watching people and thinking, snack. Even though it was scary, foxfire ended up being useful. People used it as a natural lantern, but they didn't like holding pieces of haunted wood. Soldiers saw that it helped light up camps at night, but only the brave ones used it because no one wanted to sleep. Next to something that was glowing and whispering, even if it wasn't, people in the village thought it was. And of course, kids loved it. Kids in the Middle Ages didn't care about danger. They poked foxfire with sticks, brought pieces home, and scared their parents by coming into the house glowing like baby swamp monsters. We now call it a fungus that doesn't hurt anything. People in the Middle Ages thought it was a sign from the universe. They thought that glowing wood wasn't natural. The forest was politely telling you to turn around, you do, not belong here. The thought that someone could suddenly catch fire for no reason was the scariest thing for medieval villagers. Life in the Middle Ages was already hard. Plagues, taxes, bad bread, and Viking attacks. The last thing they needed was for people to suddenly catch fire and say, "Hey, mind if I ruin your whole evening?" Stories started to spread through villages about people who supposedly just caught fire. They were sitting by a fire, drinking ale, or taking a nap 1 minute and the next. Sleep. Rumor has it that the next thing they saw was a human torch with no warning. The villagers didn't want to know more. Why bother when fear works better? The modern explanation is now easy to understand. A lamp that fell, a candle that spilled, too much alcohol, and fabrics that burned like they were working with the flames. But people in the Middle Ages didn't have modern explanations. They had medieval explanations, which were very dramatic. The people in the village didn't think it was an accident if someone caught fire. No, no, they right away went to, the devil has taken another soul. Even if the person was sitting right next to a candle, even if the candle was on their lap, and even if everyone told them not to fall asleep near open flames, some people blamed witches because witches were the medieval version of blame it on the weather. Someone would shout, "This is witchcraft," and then everyone would nod solemnly while ignoring all the obvious dangers in the room. Witnesses said the body burned hotter and faster than normal, which makes sense since your house is made of dry wood and your clothes are basically blankets soaked in grease that can catch fire. But people in the Middle Ages didn't listen to reason. People were wary of logic. Logic had a magical smell. Monks, always looking for something interesting to write about, wrote long accounts of victims who had been turned to ashes and legs. That was the classic way to describe it. There was a pile of ash and two unharmed lower legs sitting quietly in the middle of the room, as if they had decided not to take part in the chaos. Of course, these written cases left out important information, like, we keep leaving open flames near sleeping drunk people. Maybe we should stop wearing wool soaked in lamp oil. Lighting our whole house on fire is risky. But medieval villagers liked the supernatural explanation better because it was more exciting and because thinking about safety meant admitting their homes were basically matchboxes. The panic spread so far that some villages even made rules about not going near fire if you looked. Catch fire, a word that was used a lot to describe people who drank, sneezed, or just lived. We now know that spontaneous combustion doesn't happen. But for people in the Middle Ages, you could catch fire at any time. And that made life exciting in all the wrong ways. If you think you can guess what will happen in medieval Europe, think again. In the 12th century, two kids with green skin walked out of a wolf pit in the English village of Woolpit. Yes, a pit for wolves. Medieval England dealt with wolf problems by making big holes and waiting for wolves to fall in. This time, instead of wolves, they got these kids. No one could understand what the kids were saying, and they only wanted beans to eat. They looked like they had been grown in a magical vegetable garden. Of course, the villagers acted like people did in the Middle Ages. First, panic. Then, ask questions. They tried to feed the kids bread at first. The kids said no. Then they ate meat. The kids said, "No way, only vegetables." Beans, only beans forever. They were the first people in the world to be strict vegans, long before it was cool. Are they fairies? Are they forest spirits? Are they demons? The villagers whispered. The kids were thinking, why does everyone here smell like wet hay? The green scone was the biggest shock. People in the Middle Ages already believed in elves, demons, and glowing wood. So, green kids were basically proof that the universe was bored and making things up. Some people thought the kids were from a secret world. Some people thought they were cursed. Some people just shrugged because people in the Middle Ages had seen so many strange things that nothing surprised them anymore. A local noble eventually took the children in because nobles like to collect strange things, just like people today collect limited edition sneakers. The kids slowly learned English and got used to their new world while he took care of them. They also ate less bean-only diets. Their green color faded, which means that medieval England accidentally found out about nutrition science long before anyone else. Sadly, the boy didn't live long enough to answer many questions and give any answers. The girl got older, learned the language, and gave a vague answer. She told me that she and her brother were from a place called St. Martin's Land, where everything was dark and green. Was it a real place, a metaphor, a child's imagination, or a mistake in translation. No one knows. Historians today suggest everything from poor nutrition to liver disease to a real geographic community that lives alone. But people in the Middle Ages liked the fun version better. They came from a different world. That's how it was in the Middle Ages. You didn't ask why the universe put two strange kids in your wolf pit. You just said, well, add that to the list. Imagine being a villager in the Middle Ages, going outside for a peaceful morning, maybe hoping today will be the day. There is nothing strange that happens. Then the sky opens up and drops a trout, a frog, 50 frogs, or even a whole school of confused fish that don't know how they got there. Welcome to animal rain, one of nature's most rude weather tricks and one of the strangest things that people in the Middle Ages ever saw. Of course, we now know that storms can pick up small animals from ponds or rivers, carry them miles through the air, and drop them without warning on the first unlucky person they see. The town is below them, but people who lived in the Middle Ages didn't have maps of the weather or physics. They had vibes, and the vibes said witches. If the frogs were really bouncy, the witches were very upset. Picture the scene. A frog suddenly falls to the ground next to a farmer who is taking care of his cabbages. He looks up just in time to see a second frog fall like a small green meteor. Dozens of them are falling down in a matter of seconds, and each one hits the ground with a wet slap that says, "I didn't sign up for this." Villagers were immediately scared. People screamed prayers, ran inside, covered their heads, or, in rare cases, tried to catch the falling creatures like Pokemon from the Middle Ages. Some people thought the animals were signs of disease or famine. Some people thought the frogs were soldiers in Satan's army of amphibians. At least one chronicler said with confidence that the fish rain was a sign that human sin had reached the ponds. Priests ran to the scene, their robes flapping, trying to figure out what the heavens were trying to say. They often came to a vague conclusion, like repent, because medieval priests had learned that this advice worked in almost every situation. At the same time, the animals were having the worst day of their lives. One minute they're swimming peacefully, and the next they're being pulled up into the sky and dropped miles away in a field, on a roof, or, on bad days, into a bucket of milk. It's no surprise that frogs in medieval manuscripts always looked angry. The new people were chased by chickens. Cats looked into things that seemed strange, barking dogs, at the sky like it was yelling at it to stop throwing things. But after the rain stopped, people in the Middle Ages did what they always did: cleaned up, got a little more scared, blamed the strange neighbor Margaret, and wrote it down as proof that the world wasn't working right. Animal rule is strange to us, but we can understand it. People in the Middle Ages thought that the heavens were doing improv, and nature's improv had very bad timing for jokes. You didn't need theater to have fun if you were a peasant in the Middle Ages. You only needed to watch. A knight in full armor trying to get by in the middle of a brutal heat wave. A nobleman slowly cooking inside 30 kilograms of metal while saying everything is fine is the perfect example of an elite warrior class. Imagine this. It's a hot summer day. The air is heavy. The fields are steaming hot. The chickens even look too hot. Then you see a knight in full plate armor walking across the horizon. A sauna from the Middle Ages with a horse attached. Peasants would stop working just to look, not because they liked them, but because they were very confused. Knights were basically wearing cast iron ovens. A blacksmith in a village could have easily cooked dinner on a knight's chest plate. But knights wouldn't take off even one piece of armor, not for safety reasons. No, no, because the nobility of the Middle Ages had two tragic flaws. Pride, not knowing anything about heat stroke. Even if a knight was dripping with sweat, swaying in the saddle, and breathing like a boiling kettle, they could still say, "Nay, good sir, I am perfectly comfortable." Meanwhile, the horse under him is having second thoughts about its whole life. Peasants who saw this got heat stroke from watching it. The blacksmiths, who really knew metal, looked scared. They whispered things like, "He's going to melt his insides," while the knight loudly said, "This armor is my honor." It was even worse during tournaments when they fainted dramatically into a haystack. Knights banged around on the field like tin cans that got too hot. Some people wore padded under armor that worked like insulation in the Middle Ages. Great in the winter, terrible in the summer. You could almost hear the sizzle. And the worst part is that they trained in it. Squires who had to help with this medieval grilling session learned useful things like how to pull a fully unconscious nobleman out of his armor, how to take off a helmet stuck to his head with sweat, and how to politely ignore the smell of baked human marinating in wool. There were real stories about knights falling down in the middle of a joust because their armor got too hot, like pottery kilns. Some had to be carried away like broken statues, with their legs sticking out of their metal cases at odd angles. The peasants didn't get why the nobles did this. They had no idea what chivalry, knightly honor, or fashion choices that hurt your body meant. They just saw very rich men who were willing to suffer in ways that no sane person would. But that was the nobility of the Middle Ages. If you weren't sweating out 3 liters of water, were you even a knight if you were in a portable oven? Peasants thought it was one of the strangest and funniest things they had ever seen in the Middle Ages to see a knight march proudly in metal during a heat wave. People in the Middle Ages didn't need any more haunted places. But the Middle Ages still gave us what we wanted. After battles, especially the messy ones, strange glowing lights would float above the fields at night. People started calling these strange floating balls that flickered in blue, green, or white, lights that look like corpses or willows. We now call it bioluminescent decay or swamp gas. People in the Middle Ages called it nope. No way. That field will always be cursed. Think about what it would be like to be a traveler in the Middle Ages walking home after dark. You're already scared because life in the Middle Ages was dangerous. Wolves and bandits plague Margaret, the strange neighbor, and all of a sudden, you see a soft glowing ball floating over last month's battlefield. It floats, it moves back and forth, it gets brighter, and you remember right away that you never changed your will. The lights often showed up where the ground was wet and had dead bodies on it. Sometimes, gases that came out of organic matter would catch fire or reflect light, making ghostly orbs that made even the bravest knight think twice about his life choices. People in the village who saw these lights reacted in a way that was typical for the time. Those are the spirits of people who have died. Those are evil spirits. Those are fairies trying to get us to die. Gerald is definitely to blame for this. Again, no one ever said, maybe it's natural. In medieval Europe, people didn't think logically. Parents used corpse lights as cautionary tales. Don't go out at night, or the soul lights will drag you into the swamp. This is ironic because the swamp was the real danger. Peasants really believed the lights were trying to lure them, and to be fair, walking toward flickering lights in a foggy marsh is a terrible idea. Even today, many a medieval man lost his shoe or his life while trying to follow the lights. Monks wrote about corpse lights in a dramatic way, saying they were floating souls looking for peace. Knights said they were ghosts of fallen warriors guarding the battlefield. Fishermen saw them near bogs and thought fairies were planning an ambush. Scientists today say, actually, it's methane reacting with phosphenes from decomposing organic matter, which is the least magical sentence ever spoken. But to medieval, for villagers, corpse lights were just one more sign that nighttime was full of things to avoid, like spirits, demons, glowing balls of doom, and the occasional fox wearing someone's lost shoe. The Middle Ages were scary enough during the day, but at night, when ghostly lights floated across the empty fields, the world seemed alive, and not in a good way. If you wandered into a medieval forest, which you should never do, you might see one of the strangest sights of the Middle Ages. Ages, the wild man, also known as the woodwoe. Imagine Bigfoot, but medieval, less mysterious, more confused, covered in hair, armed with a club, and radiating the energy of someone who has not paid taxes ever. Wild men show up everywhere in medieval art. Towering, shaggy figures lurking at forest edges, clutching sticks, staring with an expression that perfectly says, I wasn't expecting company. Some stories describe them as giants, others as hermits who went a little too hard on. The live, close to nature lifestyle. Either way, they terrified villagers because medieval forests were already nightmare zones filled with wolves, bears, bandits, and plants that hated you. The last thing anyone needed was a hairy philosopher wandering around muttering to trees. Most sightings followed the same pattern. A peasant went into the woods to gather firewood. He heard rustling. He turned around, and there stood a hulking man-shaped creature, covered from head to toe, in hair holding a club the size of a small child. The peasant's reaction was to feel bad right away, pray right away, and run as fast as they could. Villagers told stories of wild men stealing livestock, uprooting trees, or yelling cryptic wisdom like, the forest knows you, which is not very helpful when you're trying to gather mushrooms. Some medieval scholars said that wild men were magical beings, guardians of the forest, children of nature, or lost souls who had become spiritually unbalanced. Others said they were just hermits who had decided that bathing, haircuts, and socializing were optional. Honestly, both explanations make sense. Wild men were also popular at medieval festivals. Villages held parades where someone dressed up as a woodwoe by gluing fur onto their clothes and yelling at people. Medieval entertainment was creative. Artists loved drawing them, muscular, overgrown men who looked like they had strong opinions about moss. They usually appeared holding clubs, being chased, or trying to kidnap maidens because medieval storytellers couldn't help but add kidnapping to everything. But the most confusing part was that many wild men were probably just regular people, hermits, hunters, or people who ran away from society and said, I just need some time alone. They took that idea very seriously. To medieval villagers, the wild man represented the line between civilization and wilderness, and how easy it was for a man to cross it if he missed one too many bath days. He was scary, but also a reminder that life in the